Welcome back to the Aussie Shed, ladies and gentlemen, for another episode of Project Fairlady. So what we're going to do in this episode, folks, is we are going to reassemble these front knuckle hub stub axle assemblies. Now what you're going to see me do here, folks, is probably going to be a little bit controversial, but I'm going to go against the factory service manual, which lists a particular process to follow when you are rebuilding these knuckles. Now, what the process in the factory service manual involves is having the assembled bearing, like inner and outer cones, in it, pressing it into the knuckle here, fitting the circlip on it, and then putting the seal on, which is all well and good. But the problem that I can see with this particular process is it puts you in a position then when you want to press the stub axle in, you have to drive the stub axle with the press through the outer bearing a really long way, and the only thing holding that outer bearing is it's actually being pressed into the race, which could possibly lead to this type of marking that you have here. You know, pressing a tapered bearing into a tapered seat is really a big no-no. So I don't know why this is the way the process is outlined in the factory service manual. Well, actually, I do, and the reason is because you have to get the seal on and in place before you do the axle, before you do the stub axle, just because of the way this kind of thing is when it's kind of put together. It's kind of really badly designed for assembly, which is why they changed it on newer vehicles to a different setup where you just have like a bolt-in replaceable front wheel bearing setup. This is quite a pain in the bum to do, so I'm really not keen to do it that way, folks, just because it goes against everything I've been taught about, you know, loading up bearings when you're pressing them. So I'm going to do it a slightly different way, which is where I first press the outer, one of these two tapered assemblies there. I'll press the outer one and seal onto the stub axle. So I'll put the seal on first, then I'll press the outer tapered bearing onto it by the inside, so you're not actually loading up the bearing itself at all. And then what I'll do is I will press the race, or the main sort of bearing shell, in with the inner tapered bearing sitting loosely inside it. Press that in all the way, refit the circlip. Now the issue is that the method that I'm going to employ isn't without drawbacks. The issue is that it's going to be quite hard to seat the outer seal, because you don't have really good access to it to be able to kind of just tap it in. But all I have to be able to do is to work out a way to seat the seal as I press the axle in, which I'm pretty confident I should be able to do, either by machining up a temporary spacer out of some Delrin or something, so that the seal presses into the right depth as the axle goes in, or possibly just levering it in, going around and levering it in once the axle's in position, because that way I can press the whole thing together without putting any stress on any of the bearings. When we go in this way, the tapered bearing that's going to be on the inside here, it'll be supported on the piece that's pressing onto the axle. So again, the tapered rollers, or the roller section of the bearing, isn't actually copying any kind of pressure or stress at all. So doing it my way, I don't stress either of the bearings in any way, shape or form, but it's harder to do the outer seal. But the way the factory service manual outlines it, you really stress the outer bearing. The inner one doesn't, because it has something against it to in the same way that I'm going to be pressing it in, but the outer bearing just will get, well, it gets a really hard time. It gets the full pressing force against the rollers, which is just, I don't know, I can't bring myself to do it, folks. It really goes against everything. So if you disagree with the process that I'll be using here, folks, I completely understand. But as I say, there is method to my madness. And who knows, it could come back to bite me in the arse. I may not be able to get the seal seated correctly, and then I'm screwed. But at the end of the day, I've only got myself to blame. and you know, that's the way I look at stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to press the outer bearing and put the seal on the stub axle. The seal just slides on. The outer bearing is going to have to go in the press. So I have the stub axle currently in the freezer, because anything that's going to be pressed inside something else, I generally put it in the freezer for 24 hours. Shrinks it down just enough to make things a little bit easier, you know. I also have the proper outer piece for the bearing in the freezer as well, because it's going to be pressed inside this. Anything I can do to help this go in, make it a little bit smaller, anything like that. The factory service manual again recommends do not under any circumstances use any lubrication on this when you press it in. No oil, no grease, no nothing. So it's got to go in completely dry, which is in opposition to quite a few videos that I've seen of people doing this, you know. They always tend to sort of lather this thing with oil before they put it in, but according to the factory service manual, do not do that. So for me, the freezer's the answer, and we'll see what happens, eh? So I'll go and get the stub axle out of the freezer, we'll set it up, and we'll press the bearing on. And here it is, folks, straight out of the freezer. I generally sort of suck a bit of a vacuum onto the plastic bags just with my mouth whenever I do anything like this, put it in the freezer just to keep the air away from it. You'll see this thing will actually start to frost up from the air as soon as we sort of get it out of the bag and everything. You can see it's starting to go already. It's starting to get frosty. Right, folks, that's our seal for the front hub there. 40232-33 poo. That's the one. So when you slip this on, folks, you've got to orient it so that the retaining collar on the outside is facing up, so that when it gets pressed into the knuckle or the hub, you know, that's where it sort of bottoms out against. All this stuff's really good from the factory, folks. It comes pre-greased, and all the bearings are pre-packed with grease and all that sort of stuff, rather than aftermarket stuff that's generally not. You have to sort of grease it yourself. But you know, it's just sort of one of those things. So we'll sit that guy on there. Grab out one of our bearings from here. This is it goes on fat side first, obviously, so it can sort of, you know, go into that as it goes in, sort of thing. Oh, she's getting mighty frosty now, folks. Have a look at that. And this one, there's actually no mention of not putting any lube on it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to whack a little bit of 3-in-1. Just sort of around there and around there, just so I can sort of send it down a bit. Get a bearing on there. Alrighty, let's get this thing to the press. So we are set up, folks, and ready to press. And there it is, folks. Mate, she's looking very frosty. And as you would have seen, that was quite a bit of effort for the press. It wasn't sort of something that pressed in super easy. Even with freezing the thing and putting a bit of lube on there. So that's a lot of force that, if you did it the factory service manual way, would be pressing all of these rollers into the tapered conical seat, you know, which, man, I just can't bring myself to do it. So anyway, we'll let this thing come back to room temperature, and then we'll press in our new wheel studs. But in the meantime, folks, I think I'll use this time to set up the knuckle and press in the outer carrier of the bearing. It's in the freezer as well, so I'll head back to the bench and we'll have a look at setting that up. So this is another quite tricky little thing to sort of press together, folks. You'll need to sort of make up a couple of things. firstly, what I did here was enable to press the bearing in. Obviously the bearing has to go below the outside face of this to the height of where the circlip goes, so you need to be able to get something to push it in lower than that height. So what I've done here, folks, is I've used the old bearing outer that we pulled out of there. Not sure if you can tell, but I've actually taken a bit off it on the lathe. Not an easy thing to do because these bearing shells are harder than hell. So yeah, I just used a carbide insert on the lathe and just went at it really slow and took, you know, a couple of thou off there to take it down enough so that we have clearance, as you can see there. Just enough clearance to go in far enough to be able to properly press the new bearing in. So that's what's going to be driving the bearing in. And now on the other side, because this is the way that it'll be done, the bearing will be pushed in that way with the pressing down against here. And you'll notice that the back of this area is not exactly flat. There's things up and things down, and it's yeah, a little bit hard to work out a particularly flat area to be able to get the thing pressing nice and square, because you do not want to press this in on a bit of a cockeyed angle, because if this thing jams, it's not going to be pleasant, folks. So what I've done is I've just, you know, been through the scrap bin and found some bits and pieces, and what I have here is just a piece of aluminium. Looks like some 10mm that I've just mucked around with, and cut it here and cut it there to be able to get it to sort of fit in the back in such a fashion as it's sitting on a few points. So I'm using that point there, that point there, that one over there, and also that the top of that screw hole there. And they all are relatively close to each other in flatness, you know. So now I have that, and to give that a bit of strength, because it's only a piece of aluminium, I'm then just putting a piece of 10mm steel flat bar over the top, and then I'm going to press against that. So that should force the whole thing down nice and square, nice and straight. And with the help of this guy, we should be able to properly seat the bearing all the way in without too much trouble. We also have to load our inner bearing into this, which is a real area where I could see people would come unstuck, because this inner bearing just sits loosely in the carrier. It just has to be in there, because you can't actually get it in through the back later. So it has to be in there, even though it's not actually forming any function at this stage. It's just kind of loosely in there. Cannot forget to load that in before you start. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to go and get the bearing carrier out of the freezer. Again, it's been in there for 24 hours, just to kind of shrink it down as much as we possibly can to make it easier to get it into here. You could actually warm this up a bit as well and try and expand this slightly. You know, sit it in some really hot water, or, you know, use a torch to heat it up a bit. But I don't think that'll be necessary, folks. I think we should be able to just do it without too much problem, hopefully. And yeah, I hope I don't regret that. So I'll go and get the carrier out of the freezer, and I'll be back. And here it is, folks, fresh out of the freezer. So as I say, first thing we've got to do is make sure we drop that bloody bearing in it, because we do not want to forget that under any circumstances. In you go. So this guy will go on here. Right, there's almost nothing to start that with. And then we got our piece, so let's take all our bits and pieces and head over to the press. Alright. We'll get rid of that. So that's our piece with a bit machined off it, folks. We'll stack that on there. Like so. little piece in here. Our metal plate. And that pretty much should be us. We just want to line it up as square and straight as possible. Make sure you get everything sitting exactly where you want it. I think that's me, folks. Wish me luck. A little correction there, folks. And that should be her. As you can see, our back bearing is now captive, sitting in here, folks. Can't come out, and obviously you can't get in if you don't have it already in there. We're down all the way. We've got clearance to get our circlip in on there, which is what we'll do right now. A lot easier to get this style of circlip in, folks, than it is to get it out, that's for sure. Hopefully it should go in pretty easily. Go. And that seated perfectly, folks. Alright, so you can see now we've got our new outer section of the bearing in there. We've got our inner guy sitting in there. Now all we've got to do is just kind of put the whole lot together. But the seal around here is the sort of little bit of area of contention. But in order to do that, folks, we've also got to put the dust shield on, because the dust shield goes between the stub axle and the hub, or the knuckle, you know. And as you know, we are modifying our dust shields. Again, another issue that makes these front knuckles a bit of a pain in the bum compared to, you know, Nissan's newer design on it, which is bolt together. You don't have any of those hassles at all, you know, having stuff sandwiched between it at all. But before I go fitting the brake dust shields, it means we also have to fit the caliper brackets for the Akebonos. We have to fit the Akebono calipers in able to get the right rotation for our brake caliper clearance. But first, let's press some wheel studs into that stub axle that we did just before. Alright guys, so I'm just prepping to get these wheel studs in. So what I'm just going to quickly do is wrap some plastic wrap around this bearing, just to eliminate the potential for getting any dust or grit in this bearing now that it's all sort of set up ready to go. We obviously want to keep this as clean as possible. So I'll wrap that up and then we'll start cleaning these holes out. So I just got a drill mounted wire brush here, folks. I'm just going to run this through all the stud holes just to make sure there's no debris or anything in there, you know. There's our bag of genuine wheel studs, folks. There's a part number on there if you can make it out. Nothing like genuine stuff. Alright. Let's head over to the press and start pushing these guys in, eh? Alright guys, we're ready to go. So when you put these guys in, just sort of turn them around a bit and you feel where the serrations were from the old wheel studs that were pulled out. So just try to line them up with the old serrations. You can just sort of feel it when it drops into them, you know. And then just press it back down in, just so the serrations follow the lines of the old ones, you know. They should press in pretty easy compared to everything else that we've just done. Well, that's one. And that's it, they're all done. 5 new wheel studs. Let's head back to the bench and carry on with our assembly. Yeah, so that was pretty easy, folks. Much easier doing wheel studs in the press than it is on the car. If I'm doing them on the car, I'll use one of these. It's a wheel stud replacement tool. It's got a bearing in the back, so you can kind of you know, pull your new wheel studs in without unduly stressing everything out. Good tool. Ideal for doing wheel studs when they're on the car, but as far as doing a hub when it's not on the car, can't beat the press. Right, let's put that to one side and get this guy back. So next thing we want to do here, folks, is sort out our caliper mounting brackets and our calipers. Oh yes, that looks like the one. Yeah, that looks pretty right. Pretty confident with that, folks. I can always move it if it's wrong, but I'm pretty sure it's in the right spot there. Grab one of our calipers out. Oh, Jesus Christ, these things are big. Oh, these things have got to be the king of all 4-piston calipers, folks, honestly. They are the biggest 4-piston caliper I've ever dealt with. Let's just throw these on without any washers for the time being. Alright, good. Alright folks, now that we have our caliper location, we can set our dust shields on, work out the orientation, fix them in position, then press the stub axle back in. All painted now, folks. They came up pretty good. Pretty happy with how they turned out, actually. So now it's just a matter of lining them up and just tapping them home into position, which is easier than it sounds. Alright, that's pretty good. Now that we have our position, folks, I'll get rid of this caliper, I think, just because we're going to be doing some pressing and it'll just get in the way. So what we've got to do now, folks, is press this stub axle in. Now this was the little tricky bit that I was talking about in relation to this seal down here, and I've actually made up what I think is going to solve this problem for me. So I'll get this plastic off and I'll give you a bit of a look at what I've done. So what I'm going to quickly just do, folks, is slip this seal back up against the bearing in that direction there. Hopefully. I'll just put it on the bench and do it, guys. So the seal's now up against the bearing and you can see we've got this little gap in here. So what I've done, folks, I've got a bit of 3-inch aluminium tubing here, or aluminium pipe, with a fairly thick wall. Looks like it's about 2 mil, maybe 2.5. Cut a piece off at the right size. It's about, I think it was about 2.4 mil long, and then I've cut it in half. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to put these two halves in around under this seal to support it when we start pressing. So you can see, folks, that's now sitting between the actual flange and the underside of the seal there. So as we go in, as we press this in, it's actually going to drive that in. As soon as that bottoms out on the knuckle, I'll then take these spaces out and continue to press the axle in. That way we can use the press to bottom the seal out in position, and hopefully everything should work out really well. Alright, just get myself comfortable. Right, so you can see I've got a couple of spaces on here, folks. That's just going to get me a bit of support on this hub, like so, just so that I don't put any force against those new wheel studs, you know. So we'll sit that on there. Our drifts that we're using, folks, just so we get good clearance, you know, around everything. And I am fully going to do this by hand, folks. I'm not going to use the air assist, just because it's a little bit hard to you know, gauge where I am when I'm trying to work really accurately with stuff, you know, like these spaces underneath. Just get that, double check everything. Alright, everything appears to be where we need it to be, folks, so we're just going to start pressing this in. It's a little bit wonky, you know, when you first start and when there's not much lead in on stuff, but it straightens up pretty quick. Might just re-straighten that. So I'll just get my head down here, folks, and just get an eyeball on this seal when it's in. I don't want to go any harder than I have to on that seal, otherwise it's going to make it hard for me to get those spaces out. The seal appears to be all the way in, folks, so we'll just take this out, we'll pull those spaces out, and then we'll bring it back and continue pressing. See, folks, before I go, I'm not sure if you can see this, but if you look in there now, you'll see that the seal is pressed in all the way around. Went in beautifully, and we'll just have to take these spaces out now, which I'll do over at the bench, so they'll come out quite easily, and then we'll continue to press this all the way down. There we go, spaces are out, so we can now continue to just seat this assembly back together. So I'm just going at this quite gingerly, folks. I can feel the tension against the press a lot easier with a handle, and it moves a lot slower, obviously. So I don't want to over press these bearings together, because there is no spacer or anything that you have to press up against. You're purely relying on the bearings getting tight against the tapers that they run in. So, you know, you can sort of feel it a lot better when you're doing it by hand. You'll know when you've sort of got to a point where it's there, you know. And that's it, folks. It certainly feels like it. I'll go and get it back onto the bench. Take a bit of a look at it, Alright, well, it does appear to be good. There's no ridiculous tightness with this bearing. Doesn't appear to be any looseness with it either, which is what we want. Everything appears to be seated correctly, folks. So that's fantastic. Looking real nice. So the next thing we've got to do, folks, is throw the speed sensor ring back on, which doubles as a washer, and you know, our big nut, and then restake it once we get it sort of in position. It's looking pretty good. In order for me to be able to tension it up, guys, I've made up a little bit of a bracket. You can see it's just some, you know, I don't know, 2.5, 3 mil steel angle that I've just sort of hacked a piece out of. So I'm going to use this to lock our stub axle and everything down, you know. In the vise. Right, I'll pull you back for this, guys, so you get a bit better look. All right, so that should do a good enough job there, guys. So there's actually a torque setting range for this, folks. It's from 208 to 264 Newton meters. I reckon I'm actually probably already pretty close to that with my impact driver there, guys. It usually it depends on how much I go at it, but it'll usually knock stuff up to about 250. But let's see where we are, eh? I'm too weak. I can't get a good enough footing. There we go. No worries at all. Yep. As I said, folks, I reckon that the impact drive is probably taken up to about 250, which is absolutely fine. And so we'll stake that nut, eh? And we should be good. So all that's left to do, folks, is put our back cover on now. Just two little bolts, you know. I ain't just painted this though. It's a little bit on the soft side, so I'll just leave that off for now, folks. But you get the idea. This just goes straight back on and bolts on. And I've got some new bolts for it and everything, so it's going to look very, very nice. So I'll quickly do the other side, guys. I'll bring it up to the same point. I might even put the rotor on and stuff, and I'll tidy the bench up, and we'll have a bit of a look at them all finished, eh? So I'll be back in a second, I guess. And there we have it, folks. So this is the one that we were just looking at. That's up to that point. So it's, you know, completed. The dust shield's on there. Caliper mounting bracket. Everything's all nice and new, and you know, all that sort of stuff. It's looking real nice. And this one has the Akebono caliper and the brake rotor mounted to it. Again, you can see it all worked out extremely well. Everything fits perfectly. The dust shield fits perfectly with the rotor and the caliper. The caliper is spaced perfectly. The distance off the brake rotor is the same either end in here to the millimetre, and it's also centred this way on the brake rotor absolutely perfectly. So nice work, Z1. Good bracket making. And there you have it, folks. Completely rebuilt Z32 Knuckle, Akebono 370Z front caliper, DBA 4000 series brake rotor, and we have 370Z dust shields, which are just, you know, it's a really good setup. I'm really happy with this. So give me a sec, folks. I might go and drag one of the original front brake rotors and calipers out just so we can do a little bit of a comparison. So there you go, folks. That's the difference. Very, very, very decent upgrade, folks. Very happy to do this. Yeah, it's a lot of work. It does cost a bit to do, but ultimately, in the end, look what you get out of it. Anyway, folks, I think I've crapped on pretty much enough for this video. I hope you like the content. I hope you like my hub rebuild and, you know, the dust shields and the whole Akebono thing and all that sort of stuff. And actually, next week, we won't be continuing on with this sort of front suspension rebuild and doing the kingpins, because all that stuff's off being powder coated, so you know I'm not able to do that. So what I'm going to do, folks, is I'm going to go back to doing a bit of this. So I've got the motor and trans sitting here, and what I'm about to do is just get them back together and do a bit of a dummy fit up in the Fairlady up there, so that I can start building the dump pipes, some of the intake pipes, some of the exhaust system and stuff like that. So there should be quite a bit of intake and exhaust fabrication in the next few videos, and we'll get back to the kingpins when we rebuild those after it all comes back from coating. So as always, folks, thanks for stopping by the Aussie Shed. Bloody pleasure to have you here. If you liked the video, give it a thumbs up. Leave a comment, even if it's something negative. I can take it, folks, I can take it. Remember to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, and as always, guys, I'll bloody well see you on the next one. Cheers.